Welcome back, guys. Episode 71. Secret time. This is actually the second time that I'm recording this because I recorded this yesterday at our normal time, Tuesday at 8 p.m., which I think will be shifting to 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. However, I recorded the whole thing, felt super wonderful, super great about it, and found out that I had the mute button on the entire time. So all I had was a video of me just making a whole bunch of faces and getting really into it and couldn't hear a single thing I was saying. So back at it. This is take two. So just for, I share that mainly because I think we always think everybody else's life goes perfect. And we always think that we're struggling with when things don't go right. And in reality, it happens to everybody. And it's just how you handle it and how you show up and you just keep swinging. So this episode, I wanted to get into the identifying this unspoken expectation, especially in relationships. This doesn't have to be intimate relationships, although that's probably where it'll be most prevalent. But this is true for really any relationships where you have some of these unspoken expectations. I want to share a few stories, some ways that you can identify, and some key concepts from some folks that had shared some wisdom over the years that I think you'll get a lot of benefit out. So when I think about most relationships, and we're seeing this a lot because just relationships in general are having a hard time because there's just so much stuff going on. And so what we are seeing is, most relationships aren't falling apart because of betrayal, or if they are, like that's not really that's the effect, but not the cause. They fall apart much earlier because of this unspoken expectation. And what that can look like is keeping track, like the silent scorecard, keeping track of who's doing what without necessarily saying a word, and saying, well, I've made dinner every single night this week, and when is she going to start to take the load off? Or maybe I'm going over to my buddy's house all the time and he's not coming over to mine, and all of a sudden then you find something to fight about, and then it's like, okay, I'm out, right? The relationship kind of falls apart and things kind of go on. And so another myth that I want to talk about, because I heard this probably, I'd say older, not necessarily as much now, but definitely older, which was this myth around relationships are 50-50. I hear it every once in a while, but it wasn't as prevalent as what it used to be. And I want to cover basically that myth of 50-50 and why that's secretly destroying that connection that we have within relationships. And most importantly, when I think about relationships, there's a couple new things that are just really wild to me. Like we now have within social media, like there's a whole cultural normalization around spouse trash talk. Now I remember when I was a kid, not a kid, but like when I was younger, like in my teens and in my 20s, and I had relationships, and I remember talking to maybe a buddy and just saying like, hey, this is like this happened, and kind of getting other insights from some folks, and figuring out like, am I missing something? Am I giving too much? Like, what helped me with this? And although that is what I had done in the past, what I now realize is like, I was looking for external validation on an internal relationship. And what that sometimes that works, but a lot of times what it ends up being is then you have a third party in your relationship that really brings a lot of not fun conversations, because usually it'll slip out where it's like, well, I was talking to Joe and like Joe sides with me. That's definitely not something you want to say, because, and then it's like, well, so now why are you talking to Joe about our relationship? Why wouldn't you talk to me about that, right? And so it can get you in a really dark rabbit hole very quickly. Personal experience. So, but we've now transitioned, right? It's like that was like the age before the internet. Now that we have the internet and now social media, the amount of so many micro niches everywhere. Like what I mean by a niche is like just an area of focus. Like there's, let's just say that you want to speak to guys, and it's like, okay, you want to speak to guys that are unhappy. Then, okay, you want to speak to guys that aren't happy, that are mad at their spouse. And like you can just continue to keep going down very, very minute. And like some of these things, right? Some of these like micro niches is this normalization where spouses are just trash talking. And it's like people saying like, oh, I'm doing this and this and this. And it's like, I understand why they're doing it, because it's essentially the same thing as I did when I was in my, teens and 20s, where I would be looking for validation outside the relationship, but instead of going to a trusted source, people are now going to the internet where anybody can kind of see it. Which, it's like, if your whole life is put on for a show, you have to be ready for all of the things that goes wrong and like how to deal with it. But a lot of people don't necessarily know how to deal with that. So when all of a sudden their intimate life goes out to the public, it's like, whoa, I'm not ready on how to handle this. And then it just brings in a whole bunch of just issues. So just like an interesting thing that because Amber had sent me something. It was like the antithesis. It was like somebody who started. It was like a guy coming home, and he's like, his wife had said, tonight we're having hamburger helper. And he like lost his mind, and he was like, I want a steak and potatoes, and like, you've done nothing all day. Like, I've worked outside the home for 11 hours a day, and like, and this is the best of what I get. And it was funny because then it panned over to this dude that was talking, and he said, I'd be thankful that she actually had dinner for you. Not knowing their situation, but it's like, that is he was coming from a place, the first guy, where it was coming from a place of entitlement, where it was like, no, I have expectations that this is this and this and this. And and you obviously don't know, right? So we're picking this scenario apart, even though we don't have the full context. But some of the things, it's very easy to hear that one side of the story. And then it's like, well, if you only hear one side of the story, then you're always going to side with that person. And it's not until you hear both sides that then all of a sudden you realize there's some truth in the middle. For instance, like, you didn't know, right, how bad of a day she may have had. Or maybe, she was also working, because there's a lot of households where both people work. There's a lot of households where one person works. And it's set up on how you want to have that relationship. But having hidden expectations, or having silent expectations that builds into entitlement that never gets understood, or like never gets articulated and talked about, will then turn into these massive explosions. So if you take that whole thing, and then you add on top of it this layer of stress seasons, and stress seasons could be anything. It could be pregnancy. It could be, work is really stressful. It could be maybe you're going through some health issues. It could be maybe that she's going through some health issues, or he's going through some health issues. It could be other families. It could be, parenting or taking care of. So if you're taking care of your parents, or if you're taking care of your kids, there's a lot of stress seasons that happen. And a lot of those will basically just keep pushing until you hit the trigger that then says, hey, now I have this exposed entitlement. And it usually comes out with a lashing out of a response. And 9 times out of 10, those lashing out of responses, you may not even necessarily mean it, but when you say them, it's very hard to get that cat back in the box. And some of those, right, overreactions could be, I do everything around here. Why can't you pull your own weight? Why can't you be more like Joe's wife, where, picking on Joe and Joe's wife, I just picking random names, but it's like, why can't you be more like Joe's wife? And like, all these things that will just come out in an instant will then become extremely difficult to try to get to a healthy relationship that's back in the box. Because then at that point, it's like, well, you have to deal with that elephant in the room. Do you really think that? Do you really believe that? And if you do, then it's like, okay, you got a big issue. You got to be able to be ready to handle that level of conversation, because the stakes are so high at that point. Whereas if you understand and recognize where maybe you have some of these entitlements, you can catch them, maybe talk about them, and we'll talk about some of the ways that you can do that. But you can handle the problems when they're small. Then you're not going to have these big blow-ups that will then, then you have dudes out there that are like, my entire life just fizzled away in an instant. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. Another layer that's going on, things that I'd say, that we're seeing, is that divorce rates are on the rise, just as they had always been. I don't know that we've ever really seen them come down. And just overall emotional disconnection trends, like things like parallel play, that is a thing where, doesn't mean that you can't both be doing something that you both enjoy. Doesn't mean you have to do it together as long as you're in the same room. But then it's like, that's a precarious situation that can happen, because as long as you both are enjoying it and you can share and really have that connection, then great. But a lot of times what I see or hear is from people saying, like what's your nightly routine? And they're like, oh, we put the kids to bed, and then we basically both are on our own phones for the next whatever it is, like 2 or 3 hours, just scrolling on their own algorithms that are going kind of divergent. And then before you know it, it's like, okay, well, it's time to go to bed. And it's just almost like two people that are cohabitating. And then over a long enough period of time, when there's two people that are just cohabitating, well, then it starts to feel like a roommate situation, right? The spark dies in the relationship, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, it's your turn to do dishes, and it's like your turn to go do this, and you're just two ships passing in the night, and no more are you really trying to help each other for the sake of building this relationship, but it's more this whole, like, that kind of goes into that 50-50, where it's like, okay, well, I did my half, so like this is on you then at this point. And there is no will to try to build that togetherness, and that resentment, right? Things, when expectations don't get met, then grows in silence until you have that point where it blows up. So again, like, the stakes are really high because we know, the effect, right, which is divorce rates and emotional disconnections are there. It's super easy. I mean, it's kind of scary when you think that AI now, like, there was this whole debate that was happening that, and I don't even know if this has happened yet, but I know ChatGPT, like, they were talking about like an adult or like an erotica theme, where like you could then essentially build an intimate relationship with an AI. And you pair that with robots, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're now more tied to and wanting to build a relationship with a robot than we are with individual people. And ultimately, right, if you start to say that what makes us human and the things that we thrive is that social connection, we're just further isolating ourselves to the point where you're living an entirely solo life outside of social connection. And that's a kind of scary place to be in too, because you could, and the reason why it's scary is because when you realize that social media feeds into your confirmation bias, and you aren't aware of your confirmation bias and like starting to try to nitpick those things, then all of a sudden you're just being fed the same information, or information that is confirming that, like, hey, yeah, no, relationships are bad. No, relationships cost too much. Yep, relationships end in so much horribleness. And then it's like, no, 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 you just keep coming over here by yourself until you get so far away that it's really hard to come back from. Just like having a little bit of sadness and anxiety, if left unnoticed and nothing's done about it, and that continues to go, then it just builds that momentum in the wrong direction to the point where, like, it can just be really scary to come back from. And some people do, and some people don't. That's how we lose some people, because they get isolated. They feel like they don't have anybody to talk to, and they just further go down into this rabbit hole, that doesn't end well. So, like, there's are a lot of stakes that are happening here, and there's a lot of newness. It's not like you can kind of go back a couple generations, because we're in this world where we're expected to understand and adopt and be able to use AI, but then also be aware that every single piece of technology that comes in can serve a purpose, and it can be very helpful if it's a tool that you use. But if it's a tool that essentially manipulates you and uses you, then all of a sudden you're on the wrong end of that deal. So, and we always feel the weakest when we're by ourselves, and the enemy is always out there to try to trick, steal, destroy your life. And I'm starting to see that a lot more, where the basic things like building a relationship, it's hard, but it's so rewarding when you find it. And I think that's part of, we don't necessarily do a good enough job of, like, okay, well, it's hard, but it's not impossible. But we don't necessarily talk about, well, how do you make the hardness easier? Because the technology can also help you with that. You can use that in a way to identify the areas where maybe you are starting to build this resentment, right? And if I don't know how to have a conversation, again, you can use, whether it's social media, there's coaches, there's so many different ways out there to go improve, like, the articulation and how you're communicating what's going on, and being aware of a lot more about yourself than we've ever been able to have before. So you can use that to help your relationships so that you don't end up getting into these toxic relationships that will over time, essentially erode trust. So then all of a sudden you have relationships that you don't trust anybody anymore. You withdraw emotionally from all of your relationships, and then you get super defensive and don't want to talk about anything to anybody, which is, again, just further isolation, which we know people left in isolation is just not a great place to be. Like, it's a form of torture. If you go back, I think it was like World War II, they used to torture people by isolating them. And it's one thing like you go into prison or something, and it's like, okay, well, you have your cellmates, like at least there's somewhat of the community there. But when it's true isolation and like you're not getting any physical contact, you're not even seeing or hearing anything, it really starts messing with your brain, and it is torture. And so when we see it out in the social landscape, like just the normal day-to-day stuff, we never know who's actually being tortured and to what extent they're being tortured. And the other cascading effect of like why this is also important is that we're also, how we show up and how we handle all these relationships is setting the stage for the future generation, for our kids to understand and have the criteria that says, well, this is how relationships are meant to be. Because if you've been a dad for more than 10 minutes, you'll know that kids don't follow what you say, they follow what you do. So if you're modeling just unhealthy relationship dynamics for your kids, then that's going to be their expectation of what a quote good relationship is. And you'll see them suffer a lot of unhappiness that you will remind you that that's how you felt, but you can't help each other because you're both suffering in that. So just again, like all things to kind of keep aware of and reasoned why like this is so important. And even for those, guys out there that are saying, well, yeah, but like all my relationships are fine. We always like to think that they're fine until they're not. And, like I'll share a study with like a buddy. Like this doesn't have to be necessarily intimate relationships. This can be all relationships. I had a buddy who just went super quiet. We used to talk like at least once a week, and just even if it was, random texting type stuff, but like we'd still just connect at some point at some level. Well, he went really quiet, and it was probably 2 or 3 weeks, and Amber and I talk about everything. So I was like, I feel like something's not right with this guy, because him and I just usually talk. Like I need to give him a call. I need to reach out. And I reached out, and he, missed the call or whatever. Well, he called me back like the next day, and I was like, well, how's it going, man? He's like super busy, and you kind of tell. And I was like, well, I just had figured, like something bad is going on, because two things. One, this guy follows in with that norm, but like in general, when dudes are having a tough time, we emotionally withdraw and we put ourselves in this isolation. We don't want to talk to anybody because we don't know necessarily how to articulate it, and we don't really know what to do. So we kind of just shut in. And I had mentioned that to him, and he's like, well, yeah, okay. So here, like, yeah, work has been just really exhausting. And he just kind of like unloaded a lot of the stuff. And I said, like, bro, it's important that you talk about all this stuff. Like, you don't have to talk for the sake of talking, but you're dealing with some pretty heavy stuff there, man. And if you're just bottling that up, that's just cortisol and adrenaline that's just being pumped through your body nonstop. That's just slowly killing you. And I don't want to see you destroy your life, because you have a beautiful family. You're a super smart dude. Like you're just super capable, like just a wonderful leader. I don't want to see you suffer, because when you suffer, there's people that are looking to you for hope, like that look to you for inspiration. And so like you've got a big mission ahead of you. So don't let this erode your mission, basically. And but again, it's like you don't really know what burdens people are going through unless you maybe talk about it, or maybe you even think like, hey, haven't heard from this person for a while, so like let me maybe reach out. Let me just start the conversation and just see. Sometimes it's just life gets in the way and it's just super busy, and that's cool. But there's been so many times where people had said, I wish I would have checked on somebody when I had the opportunity. And to me, when I heard that, like there was a guy that had killed himself in high school, and like that was just the resounding thing that happened. When we had like a ceremony at the school, was like, man, like had I known, like I wish I would have just reached out. Like I never knew he was going through so much. He was always like cracking jokes and this, that, or whatever. Like I never would have guessed it. And I think that had like resonated with me because I always try to be that, just check in. Like, are you safe and healthy? Is your family safe and healthy? Like if the answer is no, then forget about whatever else that we got to talk about. Like, but safety is first. Like your health and your well-being is number one because I'm talking to you on a regular basis. Like I want you to know that I care about your well-being outside of what maybe I need from you, or you know, planning some future plans that might be adding even more stress on you, right? Not knowing what you might be going through. So just check in. Just even, use the line that's like, hey, I'm just checking in on your safety and well-being, right? You don't even have to make it a thing to minimize like that awkwardness if you don't really know how to maybe have those conversations. But just check in on your brothers, okay? Because there's a lot of pressure that's happening on dudes today, and some of them is just crushing them to death, and some of them are figuring out ways on how to deal with that and continue to move forward. And we need more of those success stories to help the guys that are struggling, so that we can all raise up to be better men in society. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about a core framework going from this entitlement to ownership. And this really interesting thing, I think it was Brene Brown that had talked about this, and I really love the way she described it. I'm going to take what she had kind of said and I'm going to expand it even further, because she's like, we never do 50-50. We do 100-100. Like 100-100 kind of has to be like where her and her husband are at. And the way that I started to look at this was, okay, if you're at 50-50, and that's like at max, like if you're saying, hey, you own 50 and I own 50, and that's like on a good day, that means there is, then it's line to line. But if you even have just a little bit of a bad day, like if you're at 95% and 95%, there's still 10% of the gap that gets undone. And that undone will bother one or both of the people in the relationship. And when it bothers one or both of the relationship, that's how you start getting into the, like, one person will crack and like either do it, or they'll just be like, hello, like why did this happen? And fault could be on both sides. So when you do 50-50, you basically are line to line on a good day. But when you have 100 overlap, it basically, like, you've got a ton of overlap. So even if you're not playing to the full capacity, that's okay, because the other person knows, hey, if I have that expectation that I'm going to give 100 on all this, then whenever they start to slip, don't worry, I got you. And sometimes you're going to have to do a full 120. And sometimes you might have to go do a full 200%. You may have to just go out there and just do everything. Like I know, for instance, when we were pregnant with Lily, I mean, poor Amber. Like I didn't even really necessarily know a lot of this because she kind of kept it, kind of quiet and hidden. But she would drive to work. It was when we were still in Westchester, and she would drive to work to UC, and she would get in her car, and she would take a bag. And it wasn't until like a week after I found this, I was like, babe, like, what are you doing? She's like, well, like, this is kind of what we have to do, so we're in it. But she would drive to work, and she had like an hour commute. So on the way to work, she would have to pull over somewhere to vomit in the bag because she had morning sickness so bad, to get back into her car to then show up to UC and go work. And I was just like, whoa, like there was, at that point there wasn't really anything we could go do. Now since then we've said, okay, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to health and safety first. Like that's part of where a lot of, I think, my health and safety comes from. There's a lot of different pieces that kind of brings that together. But it's like you don't know what people are going to go through, and there's times where you have to give a lot more. So when she would come home, she was just completely wiped from the day. She's like, I was talking all day, I was walking around the clinic, dealing with patients, and she just was exhausted. So she would come home from work and basically, nap on the couch, um, get up and then go to, or like, get up and I'd feed, like, hey, like it's time to eat, right? Make her dinner, take care of the dogs and everything. She'd eat, fall back asleep, and then we go to bed. And so there were periods of that pregnancy where I was doing the whole load. And then there's also times where like I travel for work, and Amber will pick up the pieces. and she'll go out and do the grocery shopping, and she'll do the laundry, and she'll keep the house clean, and she'll make sure Lily goes all the different places. And like, she picks up a lot of things that I wouldn't normally do. And when you have that 100 mindset, and it doesn't have to be that you're doing it all the time in all ways, but you at least know, and you come from a place of servant type leadership and generosity and ownership, it then says you'll never be in the scenario that says that's not my job. Because as soon as you say, well, that's not my job, now you have that hidden entitlement. But versus if you say, like, hey, like, all of it's my job, and the fact that you took the garbage out, like, thank you, because that was, I had figured that was something I needed to go do. And you then start to turn everything more into appreciation. It's like that one small trick was a big game changer in our relationship, because now, yeah, there's some weeks that are really busy, and we cover that. Like, there's some things that we'll get into as far as like practical things that you can do that will help your relationship if you choose to do them. But like, sort of the big picture there, like one of the big lessons that we had is like, love is seasonal. It's not symmetrical. So many people think that it needs to be symmetrical. Like, well, if I do the bills and finances, then they need to go do the house cleaner. If like I go and work, then she needs to take care of the house. And although there might be rough ground rules that says, hey, yeah, you're going to go do that, don't be surprised if you got to pick up the shovel and start doing the inside work on top of the outside work. But if you come in with that servant relationship, basically saying, I'm here to make sure that our household is operating and moving in the direction forward as that leader, then you're going to make sure that everything will always get done. And it might be that one or both people are overwhelmed, and you have to look for a different solution to the problem, which is, hey, maybe it's a Roomba, maybe it's hiring somebody to come in and clean the house, maybe it's taking all the laundry to one of those, they do it, like you drop it off, pick it up after work, and now all of a sudden laundry becomes a thing of the past, but it's not having to be done in the household. Like, there's so many different, we live in a time where there's so many options on how to get all this stuff done, that we just need to be more creative in how we can get this stuff done so that we're not burning one or both parties out in that household. Now, what that looks like on relationship, parents up or parents down, or just normal relationships, I'd say it follows this 3-step shift. Like, one of them is awareness. You can't change anything that you're not aware of. Okay. So you have to become aware of entitlement. You have to be looking for that, right? You got to trigger your reticular activating system to say, like, where am I entitled? Where do I think that I'm too good to pick up a shovel and start getting to work on something, so you can catch it early? The second one is reframing. So instead of saying things like, well, what am I getting? Reframe it to, like, how can I serve? How can I make this household better? How can I move the ball forward? Or how can I take something off of my spouse's plate? Or if it's a buddy that is going through, we've had this, I think it was like end of last year. It was like Christmas time frame, where it was like everybody in our life was just getting sick. And so we ended up having to cancel a lot of plans. And I can't remember what day it was, but it was like some day that Amber was like, you know what? Instead of just asking what everybody needs, I'm just going to make a giant batch of homemade chicken noodle soup with real bones and like the whole thing, like everything from scratch. And I'm going to make a big batch of it. And we're just going to go do porch drop-offs to everybody that is sick right now. And we did. And it was like one of those, okay, we could see that they might be struggling. So if they're struggling, chances are they're not eating the best food, because if the whole household is sick, then no one's going to be saying like, well, I'm going to go make some really healthy food. And we just saw like how we could serve. How could we go and help people that, who knows, right? There is no scorecard. It's just people that we have in our life that we love, that we want them to be healthy, right? Health and safety is number one in our world, always. And doing those things for people outside your circle, like when you look at it through that lens, now all of a sudden, don't be surprised when, like, the benefit, like, we don't do it for the other benefit, but a lot of times it's turned into, if I'm out of town, all of a sudden somebody will be like, hey, you know what, Amber, I just made you some dinner, so that way you and Lily have food. You guys don't need anything. I know it's extra stress on the household, and you start building that community. And when you build that solid community of people that are willing to pour into you, now all of a sudden your life gets better because you feel like, hey, I don't have to take the load of the world by myself. I can spread it out, or I can ask for help, and all of a sudden people are willing to help me. But that it all starts with that reframe. And then, there's the systems piece. So awareness, reframe, and systems. Those are the three things. Those are the three shifts. And the systems piece of this is we started doing something a couple months ago, and it was around a family meeting. Like, I saw somewhere on social media where I was like, you know what, like, that's a really good idea. They had a family meeting, and I can't remember all the things that they talked about, but I started out and I said, okay, week one, we're just going to start with just what are we appreciative of? And we started with saying, like, hey, this is the stuff that went well last week, and these are the things that, you know what, I could use some help. And everybody, right, including Lily, that we would all talk about this stuff. And what we found was that we started to become a lot more appreciative as a family. So again, instead of looking at what am I getting out of this household to how can I serve this household, now all of a sudden things were starting to get done without having to wait to ask for somebody, because they're just like, oh, I see this on the floor, so I just need to pick it up and throw it away. Or, hey, my laundry basket's getting full, so now Lily will bring it into the laundry room and say, hey, laundry needs to be done. She's not old enough to really do that type of stuff yet, but it's if you start with that and model that, then all of a sudden it's like everybody's trying to help make this unit a lot better. And then we talk about the things that we need help on. And so some weeks it's, hey, Amber's got a lot of clients and she needs help with a whole bunch of morning stuff, getting like the morning all stack done. And it's like, okay, great. Then I'll wake up a little early, and I'm a morning person, she's not, and I'll get to work and start getting that stuff done. Or if it's, hey, I need to go out of town here and here, so what can I do to help prep you so that you have everything you need? Like, I'll go make sure your car is filled up, so that way you don't even have to worry about going and pumping your own gas. But like your tank's filled up, you want to go grocery shopping, so that way you have everything that you need, so you don't necessarily have to take Lily out to go grocery shopping. It's like everything is here. Or there's Kroger that does delivery, at least here in Cincinnati, but I'm sure like Amazon now, you can go get all your groceries from Amazon too. But like, what systems can you start to build in your life to help your future self, and in some ways help to plan so that you don't end up in that resentment, or start to build that entitlement, which then when entitlement is those hidden expectations. When those hidden expectations aren't met, then it turns into resentment, and then that resentment turns into a full up blow on story. Okay. So the where this will start to break down is the internal voices and resistance. And I'll be the first to say I've started to take really notice. So like I've tuned my reticular activating system to like, what are all the resistant and the internal voices? And golly, it is just amazing how much negativity can exist, and how many doubts and shame and guilt and fear and anxiety and all these different things that is playing in those internal voices that you may or may not be actually giving time and attention to. But if those voices, like if you go back to saying like how we show up, and everything comes back to your thoughts, and your thoughts, you have 60 to 80,000 thoughts in a day, and 80% of those are the same thoughts that you had before. If you're having a lot of those negative thoughts that are in the background over and over again, then it's going to start to shape how you show up. And so if you're hearing some of these voices where it's like, you're giving more than she is, like, bro, when is she going to start to pick up and start doing something? Like, this isn't fair. All of that is just breeding opportunities for you to build the entitlement, which then breeds the expectations not being met, which then builds the resentment, which then builds sooner or later just the flip of the switch where it's the blame game, turns into massive, nasty conversations, in a lot of ways, just friction and stress in a relationship that is avoidable. We just got to take some necessary proactive steps. So we talked about what we do, right? Where you can start. You may not need a family meeting, You may just say, hey, Eric, that's a little over the top. Not going to go do that. Cool. The things that you could do is literally just ask your spouse and or just your friend, right? If it's a parent up or parent down, all these questions work for everybody, the relationships in your life. But like, where do you need support this week? Like I ask all my clients that. I go, where do you need support this week? Is it something in accountability? And a lot of times they say, you know what? Like, I actually don't need anything. Like, I'm actually really good. I feel good. I've got a plan. I'm going to go out there. Fantastic. But just that simple question, like, what do you need support this week? And sometimes it could be something small. Sometimes it could be just really big, but you don't know unless you start to ask. And, this other piece, we'll get into some cool questions because I had asked a couple buddies before doing this, and I wanted to get some questions until we get to the point where we can do this live and you can type questions in the chat. But I got some cool questions that I'll answer to make sure that you stick around for. But the one other thing that you can ask is like, hey, what did I miss this week that you carried? Because when you start to do that, now all of a sudden you realize, hey, I may think to myself that I'm great and wonderful. I may think, going and keeping cars clean and doing all the things or whatever it is that I do in the household, I might think that, hey, I'm batting 100 over here. I am fantastic. Well, that's just pride coming in. But if I think that, then that means that I'll never think that I actually missed things. And 9 times out of 10, there's things that I miss. And I know this because humble pie gets served daily. So when I ask Amber this, like, hey, what did I miss that you carried for me this week? She'll be like, oh, you did this, like you did this. And it was fine. She picked it up and she did it and she didn't even complain about it. I didn't even know about it. So it's even more of a complex situation where you drop the ball on something, your spouse had to carry it. And now all of a sudden you're going to come at them with the like, hey, you need to pull your weight, where she might have an entire list of things that she needs you to do. And it'll just turn into this big explosion of like, hey, no one's doing the things that they needed to go do. So, but I'll get into some of the questions. So like I said, I asked a couple buddies and said, hey, this is a topic. This is what we're going to go into. What questions would you have that I can kind of cover live or, cover in the podcast? He says, what if I'm the one giving 120%? Because I got a buddy that's like that, where he's like, man, I do everything. I do this and I do that and I do that. And I had said, okay, well, ask that question. What have you dropped that they picked up? And he's like, but I didn't drop anything. And I go, well, that's what you think. Like, that's your confirmation bias. Like, if you go around and see all the things that you did, like, let's say you took the trash out and you look down and you're like, hey, see that trash taken out? That was me. You go and you're like, hey, I went grocery shopping. And you're like, see that fridge in there? Like, that was me. And you just go around and you're just like patting yourself on the back. That's just building your confirmation bias of all the things that you did. But you won't ever see all the things that maybe you didn't do. And so if, your spouse is like, hey, can you take the clothes out of the from the washer and put them in the dryer? And you're like, hey, I'll do it. And then you don't do it. And then she has to go do it. Well, then you got some empty spots. You got some blind spots that you got to go catch yourself on. So the first thing is, if you feel like you're the one giving that 120% all the time, check in and make sure that that's truly a true statement, because you might be high on your own supply, where you're saying like, hey, bro, I'm crushing. I got all this stuff done. If you ask, right, and that truly is a statement, okay, then we can move it into part 2 of this, which is then you start to ask the questions like, hey, what do you think what is it that you want out of this relationship? And then you share what it is that you want out of a relationship. But you guys talk about what your expectations are. You articulate them. Because there's one thing for certain. If you never tell somebody your expectations, they will always fail them. And they'll never know that they actually did it. And that was a big, like, aha moment. I can't remember where I picked that up, but it was like, yeah, if you have all these, because I think I for sure did this in previous relationships, where I have all these expectations where I'm like, well, she needs to do this, 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 and this. And when she didn't do it, then I was like, I don't even know why I'm in this relationship. It wasn't until like somewhere along the line, somebody gave me that piece of wisdom that was like, bro, if you're never telling them what your expectations are, then they will always miss it. And they won't even feel bad about doing it, which makes you even angrier, because now you're like, they don't even care that they didn't even do the things that were up my expectations. But they couldn't even know that because they never knew. They were never even given an opportunity to say, like, okay, I hear you and I can do that, or I hear that, but I don't think I can do that. What about this? And then you settle on what the expectations are. So if you're given that 120%, have you had a reconciliation? Like, go back a couple episodes and look at that episode around reconciliation. Have you guys reconciled the relationship and figured out what the definition, what she needs or he needs from it, and what it is that you need from it, so that you guys can then start to merge and say, okay, what does 100-100 really look like? Second question, how do I address entitlement if I think that it's my spouse's side? Again, a little bit similar advice, which would be, we always think everybody else is entitled, even though we might be hidden in our own entitlement trap. And some of that is facing into it. Like, again, if she has all these demands and you're just going and supporting endlessly, but then if you have never said, hey, I can't keep doing this. Like, this, I'm given a lot. Like, something has to break. I can't do all these things. I'm just one person. I just physically can't do it, which is hard for a guy to say. So I'll give that to you. But if you don't ever say that you need help, then you're in some ways responsible for your own spouse's entitlement, because you're saying, like, yeah, I'll just go do all these things, but you've never really agreed on, like, what that 100-100 looks like. So if you're like, hey, don't worry, I'll take care of this. 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 You're just burying yourself in responsibility. There is a little bit of that says, hey, you have to see, if you see your spouse drowning, you got to go lend a helping hand. But if you never tell your spouse that you're struggling, then they don't know to put the hand in the water to help you out. And I'd say there's, like, another piece of this too, which follows into the next question. So I'll save that response. But it says, like, what if appreciation isn't reciprocated? So it's a little different. So, like, question 2 was like, hey, what happens if they're the one that has entitlement? There's the, are you giving appreciation? Because a lot of times what I found is relationships is people don't know how to model behavior that was never modeled to them. So you might not be, like, you might be in this relationship struggling, but you're struggling because maybe it was never modeled to you, and or for her it was never modeled. Just like two bros, if you guys are just best buds and then all of a sudden, like, there's a tiff that gets in there, well, you might have never been modeled how to handle conflict and boundaries within a friendship. And so if you haven't, then again, it's going to come across very blunt. It's going to come across very dynamic when it doesn't necessarily have to be. And so, like, if you show up with this appreciation lens, a lot of times what I found is when you start to show up with appreciation, you create almost a safe environment for them to start to open up and have the appreciation back to you. But if you're always doing the blame game, then you're essentially putting everybody around you on a defense mode. And if they're all on a defense mode, then they will always be tiptoeing on glass, which nobody wants to do that. But they'll just be tiptoeing around, and you won't ever figure out what's really going on. So now you're in a relationship that you're not really happy about, but you can't talk about it because you're putting everybody on the defensive. So again, right, if you take that and say, hey, I got to be the leader to go lead this through, maybe I got to show some appreciation. And if it's not reciprocated, the next question is, okay, do you feel appreciated? Because there's you may or may not know, there's, like, the 5 love languages. So what that means for those that haven't read that book is there's different ways that you give love and there's different ways that you receive love. And it doesn't mean, like, love it again. It does not all this stuff is truly fixed into this intimate relationship, like with your spouse. It's just that's usually where a lot of problems stem from. It can be applied everywhere. But if your giving love language is acts of service and theirs is quality time, then you could buy her a Lamborghini, you could build her a dream house, you could buy her an airplane, like, you could buy her all the jewelry, all the Louis Vuitton, doesn't matter. You could shower her with all the gifts. But if she values quality time, then she may answer when you ask the question, hey, do you feel appreciated? She may say no, which will be very, very, very hard for you to hear because you're like, I have showered you. I've spent thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, when is enough enough? And you're just giving in the way that she's not receiving it. And so you would be better off saying, okay, like if you're not feeling that appreciation, like how could I show you appreciation? All you gotta do is ask. And once you find what that piece of it is, and it could be secret love notes, it could be doing the dishes, it could be just sitting on the couch with her, it could be just holding hands, like who knows what that is. But if you ask her, she'll tell you. And when you do that, then all of a sudden you're going to start to see the reciprocated. But a lot of times when we don't feel that appreciation back to us, that means that we're trying to push, in some ways, our own love onto somebody, like, let me love you, darn it. But it's not met. Like, they're just not feeling it. So if that's you, then like maybe try that and see if that works. Next question, how do I avoid burnout while giving fully? It's understanding where your boundaries are. It's okay to want to give fully, but again, with it being 100-100, having that overlap, there's going to be times where, you might be flirting with that line of burnout. And it's like, okay, if that's you and if that's where you're at, do you know how to articulate, hey, I'm raising my hand, I'm drowning here, I need some help. I can't keep doing this because I'm on my way to burnout. I'm stressed out. I don't know how to articulate it, but I feel burned out. Because if you don't, then you will just continue to keep giving fully. You'll say, great, Eric said 100-100, I'm going to go do that. But then if you can't articulate where you're starting to burn out and where you need help, then all of a sudden you'll experience it, and that'll be hard to recover from, right? So I kind of want to wrap up here. Strong marriages aren't built on fairness, they're built on ownership. So moving forward, right? Hopefully this helps you. If it does, then let me know. Um, I'm passionate about keeping relationships together because there was something that caused you and the other person, and it's true again in all relationships, but there's a reason why you are having certain people in your life. And some are married, and some are best friends, and some are kids, and some are neighbors. But there's a reason why these relationships started in the first place. And it's only through the tainting that then starts to turn into a lot of relationships falling apart. And so when we start to take ownership of that and really try to come from a servant style leadership, we can then start to identify how we can make those relationships better and more robust so that it can handle more of these storms. And as always, right, I'm always trying to call men higher. I always want to try to help lift them up, give them tools, tips, tricks, strategies, ways, an organized system that will help them live this exceptional life, because I truly believe that every man out there has his version of an exceptional life. He just might not know A, what it is, and B, how to get it. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to do with Man of Class. That's why this podcast exists. And so if this has helped you, I please urge you to go share it with somebody, go share it with another guy that might get some value from it. And as always, if you got some valuable learnings from it, reach out, let me know. I'd love to hear any success stories that comes from it. So with that, this is now Wednesday, should have been Tuesday, but we can't always make sure that the mute button is off. So happy Wednesday, happy end of February, and we'll talk soon.